Morning. Oh gosh, that's loud. Morning. Morning. I'll wake you up.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Well, the people up over there. Hi, I'm Nick Mothershaw. I'm Chief Identity Strategist at the Open Identity Exchange, and I've been asked to chair this panel this morning where we're going to be talking about orchestration. And thank you very much for making it here. For those of you in the room after last night's celebrations, and for those of you online, a warm welcome to today's proceedings. I hope you've been with us for the last few days, and we've got another packed day for you here at the GAS conference. So brilliant that you can join us. We've got people from all over the globe joining us here. It's about 200 people on site here, but there's another 400 of you out there online. So welcome. I hope you enjoy the day. So we're going to talk about orchestration providers, and I'll start in a moment by talking about what is that, and we'll have a discussion amongst the panel. But I'll introduce myself. But so I'll come to the panel. John, you've got the mic there. Do you want to just kick off with an intro of who you are? Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. I'm John Ahrens. I'm the CEO at Veritat Technologies, and Veritat is an agent identity verification services provider and an orchestrator. We were founded in 2006, so I feel like we're in a good position to say we're one of the pioneers anyway in the agent identity verification space. We began back then using trusted and verified data sources like most, and you roll the calendar up to the present. We're not only just doing that, but we're doing all these other methodologies for verification, and we're orchestrating those, and we're working alongside a lot of great partners, some of whom are in the room at the moment, who provide a service that we can leverage. And so it's a pleasure to be here and see all you here, and I'll turn it over here to Chris.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris Glethill. I'm the founder of a company called PDMS, which you won't have heard of. We're, although we do have a company called PDMS which does Dear Seaman, but that's not us. When you look us up, they come up first. My interest in this is a long career in software engineering, where we've been involved over more than 30 years in solving a variety of complex problems, often on systems of public record, where the question of entitlement, and age verification is a question of entitlement often, and the question of associated questions of identity and other attributes are nearly always a really important part of the record, and the ability to share or make decisions, quite important decisions sometimes based on that data, is critical. And obviously the context of being able to do things in a digitally transformed way requires some of those things to be able to be done electronically, which is critical, I think, to the transformation of a very large proportion of public sector systems, which is my main interest.
Hi, so my name is David Crack. I'm the founder of a company called CDD Services. We have two products. One is called the Spotlight Compliance Engine, and that's our orchestration engine. And we are just launching next week, actually, our scheme called Safeguarding, which is aimed at volunteers in the UK for doing criminal records checks when people are working with children of vulnerable adults. My background is in financial services, and Spotlight originally started as an onboarding system for a bank, would you believe? But we have since pivoted that into the social arena because we actually found that there was a dearth of useful technology in that space. So we're working in collaboration with a number of organisations under the Safeguarding banner to really focus on social value and try and create a more protective environment with modern digital tools.
Brilliant. Thanks for the intros. I think this mic's a bit directional, so you might want to hold it like that rather than like that. So let's kick off with orchestration service provider, broker, hub, agent, aggregator, all these words used to describe a similar function. But just from your perspectives, what is an orchestration provider? What does it do?
Well, okay, I'll kick off first. So from our perspective, I mean, first of all, if there's people from outside of the UK, this is within the context of the Digital Trust Framework that's being rolled out in the UK. And for us, an orchestration provider is really a hub that orchestrates different services. And in our case, it's supporting something called a scheme, which is our safeguarding scheme. So the way probably I try to articulate that out to people is that if you think of the scheme as being the equivalent of a mobile network, so like the equivalent of EE or O2 or something like that, then what would be plugged into that are reliant parties, organizations that require those services. And on the other side, there'll be organizations that are providing identity assurance and also maybe personal data stores. So the orchestration layer, the scheme, sits in the middle of that. The difference between orchestration and the scheme is that orchestration is tech, whereas the scheme is more about governance. That's my take on it anyway.
Right, I have two takes on this. I have a technical take, if you like, and as a software engineer, and in that context, an orchestration service is something that any reasonably sophisticated modern computer system has, which has a database at one end, information, and users, a variety of different users and processes on the other end. And the process of orchestrating between those things is a standard requirement of pretty much the systems architecture for any modern system of any complexity. So that's my starting point. The second point, obviously, is, well, what's the relevance of that in the context of age verification or that wider sort of identity and attribute framework? And in that context, it's the ability to take trusted services in relation, in this case, to age verification, and make them available to underlying systems in a way which is compliant with the law, with, in other words, data minimization and all those other requirements, and also technically efficient and appropriate to the underlying system. So the orchestration process is a requirement in this context because the marketplace has evolved in a way where there are lots and lots of services out there which do a part of the process, and lots of underlying systems who need, or organizations really, which need services which rely on some piece of information which they're not necessarily in a position to provide themselves, so in order to comply with the law relating to people's eligibility for a service, for example, and so on. So orchestration is, from my perspective, the process of making the fairly simple transactional services useful to the underlying systems or users.
I suppose my answer is a bit of a synthesis of the two. And if I could add a bit of a practical layer from, just our perspective, because we are, I think, a little bit different from perhaps what you might consider the traditional orchestration definition with respect to this framework that you mentioned. But Veritat is a company that began its journey, as I mentioned earlier, just verifying with, trusted and verified data sources. And over time, so many new ideas came along. I can remember when they first came out and said, let's maybe use your social security number to help verify for, getting a coupon for some kind of an advertisement. I thought, nobody's going to give you their social security number for that's not happening. Well, yeah, sure, it began to happen because the culture began to change. People were willing to share more information. And then came along the document. And I remember someone saying, gee, with this service out there, now you can get and verify your driver's license. And I thought, I'm not giving you my driver's license for a coupon on the internet. That's probably not going to happen. Well, okay, by now I've really learned my lesson, because there's so many new things that are happening and new things that are available in terms of the methodologies, right? So you have data, you have documents, you have two-factor, you have, all these new biometric options that you can choose. And so we felt like we were orchestrating rules. We felt like we were orchestrating the data early on. And so from that point of view, we were orchestrating and sort of putting together in a waterfall or a flow how we would best accomplish a trustworthy verification. But as all these other methods emerged, it became clear to us that our customers wanted the option to be able to do more than just verify with some data. They wanted the option to use a document and two-factor and biometrics, a selfie, and they wanted to use mobile data and so on. So today, where we are, we're really sourcing and we're managing and we're standardizing across a multitude of methods for the benefit of our client to leverage best-in-class solutions that are out there for them to consume one by one, but in the orchestration approach, and again, by definition, rather than a strict definition, but by definition, an example. To make that definition, we are synthesize all of those methodologies and allow our customers to leverage them. Even reusables now, we've just added reusable identity to our mix, and we begin to productize these. So our platform is called Veritad VX, and we are looking to coin an acronym with that for the verification experience. So we're not only orchestrating the rules and the providers and the journey and the flow, but we're also now allowing our customers to orchestrate the experience for the end user. And so from a holistic point of view, and of course I answer questions the longest possible way, if I can find it. There'll be no time for their questions if I keep this up. But I think what we're doing is trying to, from a holistic point of view, allow our end user customers to have the maximum flexibility they can have, not only in the methodology they choose, but the provider, and to orchestrate all of these as well with the experience.
Brilliant, thank you. And you've touched on some examples from your own experience of what you're doing in your own businesses. Can you give examples of orchestration services that are live in the ID systems around the world, in any particular examples?
Should I give somebody else a turn?
Yeah, all right. Here we go.
Yeah. I can talk about an orchestration service that we're currently building, which will be live very shortly, and that's the specific situation there is that on the PDMS is based. We have the 85,000 people and we set our own laws, and we're in the process of completely redrafting the Digital Transactions Act, which is essentially the governing legislation for any kind of digital identity. And part of the purpose of that is to make it possible to provide or to use digital identity and digital attributes on any kind of transaction. Essentially, the purpose of the redrafting is to make it legal to use a digital approach to action, including signing wills, witnessing documents, and so on. And the purpose of that is to make it essentially to create the opportunity for government and for business on the island, financial services and so on, to be able to operate internationally without people necessarily having to travel over to the island to sign things and so on. And obviously in doing that, we need to be able to, because we're only 85,000 of us, so we have to be able to accept legitimate credentials from lots of places. And we also have to manage things like young people buying alcohol and all the usual stuff. So we're looking at we're looking at the same time in our orchestration project of high net worth individuals from the point of view of compliance with Moneyval and the ability to ensure that the ultimate beneficial owners of Manx registered entities are who they say they are, and that we know who they are, and we can report that to our friends in the States and so on. And at the other end, being able to do things like age verification easily for the Manx citizen. So we're looking at both two very different use cases at the same time within an orchestration process, and looking at a variety of different providers and use cases through the same, essentially building up an architecture which is all about orchestrating these things in the most appropriate way for the particular use case.
Yeah, so I think, Nick, I'll be talking from our experience as well. So I mentioned earlier on a bit about, from our perspective, the difference between the orchestration and the scheme. So it's from our point of view, the tech is very similar to the use case that Chris was talking about, except what we're doing that's different is that we've pivoted it into the social care area. So we're actually going for the hard to reach populations. So that will be individuals who actually don't have any identity documents. From modern slavery operations, or they may be immigrants into the UK and they don't have any documentation at all. So it's how do we then give them an identity that they can then use and engage with society. So what we've found from a scheme point of view, and as I say, the scheme is the governance area of this, is that we're working in collaboration with charities and different organisations that work in this space, organisations that specialise in putting volunteers into roles within charities who actually themselves could be ex-offenders. They could be people who have don't have identity documents for different reasons. So they have a different experience. So a lot of these guys are really wary about digital technology and all kinds of issues. So it's how do we land this technology to enable them to start playing a positive role in society and actually genuinely making a difference on the ground. So it can't be a tech solution. It's enabled by a tech solution. But the most important part is how do you actually land that in a way that's simple and understandable and accessible for a wider group of people who otherwise would be excluded from the digital economy.
That's a really good point, because that picks up on one of the functions we've got around explaining this to users. And that could be a scheme or orchestrator function. John, have you got anything to add to that? One of the things we're talking about, if we start drilling into the functions maybe of digital identity and digital identity, orchestration service providers as a whole, what do you think some of the key functions that an OSP will do? What are the core elements of service that it does? And by all means link that into your own services as to how that works.
Well, I mean, we've actually been expanding the scope of what we orchestrate. As I mentioned about our attempt to coin a new acronym with VX, we're always looking for ways to make it less complicated for my customer or our customer, and also create a sort of a balance between that famous friction and frictionless, and making sure that you've done a good job verifying that you've got the right result. But in addition to us orchestrating the providers and the rules and orchestrating some of these methods, we've begun the process now of allowing our customers to orchestrate so they can realize the benefit of each of their end users having their best experience. So we were in this Google workshop yesterday together, and watching Google go through the process of examining whether or not their end user experience was going to be effective in verifying age. Okay, so they gave us all the screens. We sat in groups. Luke was there with me in the back. We were just going through, like, this is good, this is not so good, and so on. It's a process, and it's probably interesting, each perspective of the experience that folks were examining. They came up with different ideas and different things about it, and it's all based on their bias, where they come from, I guess. And so in terms of orchestrating the experience, what was Google after? They were after making sure that they got participation. They were after making sure that once they got participation, that they didn't have any abandonment of the transaction at some point. And then how were they able to convert? Were they able to convert that end user and actually make some sense of why we're all here anyway, which is to get new customers and to make business happen and that kind of thing. So, we've been very busy, coming up with best in practice ways we can give our customer the ability, without having to go through an awful lot of coding, a way for them to present an A/B test and work through various scenarios of presentation, so that we're not just orchestrating the providers or the methods, we're orchestrating the experience as well. So I think there are a number of advantages, obviously, with orchestration that are obvious, but I think there are probably some more hidden ones in there that we can find as we go along for orchestration, and giving our customers the ability to do more business online more successfully.
So, and you've come back to the user again, as you do, Chris.
Yeah, I'd like to sort of expand on that, and I think that because we've got some quite different business models around here. And I think that for me, there are three things. It's compliance, convenience, and cost effectiveness, effectively. And so I'm always looking at this, and because I'm not in the process of building a business which is going to get very large based on a transactional business model. It's much more a business based around about the exploitation of the great stuff that lots of people are doing out there with technology, making it consumable for large organizations that have a system of record behind the scenes. That's what we're all about. And it's a very different business model. So we're piggybacking a little bit on the innovation that's going on here, and many people will have built many things. Some of them will actually build real businesses out of that. An awful lot of them won't in reality. But technology moves on as a consequence, innovation happens. And so for me, the orchestration process as well as the system is about the ability to make that technology and that innovation useful in what are often quite old legacy contexts for good reason. You don't need to throw that stuff away. It's almost like my job is to stop you having to throw away a load of stuff that works just because you need to do some digital stuff at the front end. And that's what orchestration is for me.
Nice. David, do you want to pick up on
Well,
that?
yeah, I mean, just very quickly, you know, just picking up on your point, Nick, about getting public buy-in to it. So what we try to avoid, so I agree with basically the previous comments. What we try to do with our messaging, though, is that we don't actually talk about tech at all, right? Because it's all about the outcomes. And one of the features of the stuff that we're doing is personal data stores, which isn't, I'm not going to open that lid, but you know, there's a whole bunch of issues around personal data stores when you plug it into orchestration engines. But obviously that gets quite technical and quite difficult. So we've taken a different approach in the way that we communicate this, you know, given that the social group that we're going for. So we look at, in the communication, we look at identity in a different way. We're talking about identity as if you have a badge, right? So, you know, that's the most basic thing of human nature, is that you have a badge, and it's us versus them, that type of stuff, right? So we then look at how you can communicate stuff around badges. And we've learned a lot in this country and also in the States and elsewhere around how populist politicians use phrasing and identity to boost their particular cause, whatever that might be. So in the UK, get Brexit done, you know, bring back control, or make America great again. Those cut through phrases. So the phrase that we're leading with Safeguarding is, it's my data, my decision, right? And you know, and that just has that populist, yeah, it's my data, right? Shut off, it's my data, right? And the tech just fits into that emotional play. So we don't talk about the tech, we actually talk about empowerment and getting back control of your data. So, you know, the tech then just is an enabler to make that happen. But you've won the emotional argument.
Right, and one of the functions that we see in orchestration is, well, one of the problems that we need to resolve is that, you know, privacy, data management, data protection, compliance. So what role does an orchestrator play in that function?
I can take that one. I was thinking about, we were going to talk about this, and a terrible, terrible joke kept popping into my head, and it was one from the 1970s, really, which was, what's the fastest game in the world? And it's passing the parcel in an Irish pub. And I think, well, yeah, I know, I'm sorry. But obviously that's ancient history. But what it made me think about, the reason it kept popping into my head, was because effectively the role of an orchestrator is to get that sensitive data, which you really don't want to be holding, yeah, to the person who has a legitimate reason to hold it as quickly as possible from the person who wants to provide it. That is the essence of it for me. And so essentially an orchestration provider's role is to minimize in any way they can the amount of sensitive data they hold while still providing the service they need to provide to both parties. The person wishing to access a service and the person or the party relying on the accuracy of that data.
I mean, certainly I resonate with all of that. You know, from a compliance point of view, you know, our end user customer has a very significant exposure, as everyone knows, to the regulatory bodies and the rest, who are carefully watching how we manage that data and how they are using the data and holding it. And so we see it's a critical role for us to support the end user customer in making sure that we all accomplish the goal of keeping this data safe and minimizing the amount of data we use. And so to that end, for orchestration, and in the States, we've got a couple of pretty onerous laws, which I'm sure you're all aware of too, in terms of the biometric privacy acts that are popping up around, but Illinois being famous for one. You know, the notices all of the consents, making sure that you've got proper alignment for all of the jurisdictions, perhaps around the world. You have certain requirements. You've got a lot on your plate to do. And so as an orchestrator, one of the things we can do to help our end user customers is to facilitate their compliance need. And so we design screens and allow them to edit those screens and help them with their, disclosure. Like make sure if you're going to collect biometric information in this transaction, in this jurisdiction, that you've made sure that you've got that button to click or that phrase to read. And so orchestrating compliance is really part of orchestrating the agent identity verification process for our customers. And so, there's a critical role I think the orchestrator plays in making sure that they're not only compliant and that they're not only doing everything they can to safeguard the data, but they're also doing whatever they possibly can to facilitate their end user customers' journey in that same fashion. So.
Yeah, so the thing I would add on the compliance stuff is in a previous life, I used to run it in compliance departments and risk departments in banks. And one of the famous branding of those type of departments is that they're the business prevention department. And that's often the way that compliance is actually looked at. And I don't know if anyone's had a chance to look at the Financial Times today, but there's Lloyds Bank have actually laid off a load of risk managers because they actually see them as actually preventing the business from going forward. And having worked in that risk industry, I think that's probably true. So the thing I hate about compliance is tick box compliance, because that's where your job worth sit. So it's a bit like your car park attendant. He's only got one job, which is to raise the gate, but he's going to make it really hard for you to raise that gate, right? Because that's how he measures his success. So if you have a compliance department that's looking at tick box compliance, that can definitely be business prevention. And how that then manifests itself in IT systems is that obviously you've got the compliance person as the business guy defining the requirements, and the IT bloke is saying, well, if you want a box to tick, I can put it there. Does that work, right? But that doesn't give you the transformation that we're really looking for on this. So we've taken a slightly different approach in terms of design. So firstly, we see compliance as an enabler for the business, not a prevention for the business. So if you look at what the regulators were trying to achieve when they came out with the policy that ends up with the tick box compliance, they're trying to mitigate against a particular harm that's arisen in society, whether it's a market failure or an abuse of power of some kind. So it's designed to solve the problem that the regulators were looking to solve, right? Don't look at how other people have interpreted that regulation. Designed to solve that social problem, and then use that design ethos to turn compliance into competitive advantage, to create a user experience that gets things right first time. So you don't have back office functions that are basically repairing things that have gone wrong up the front of the line. So if you can actually get that design right, then you'll get massive savings on the back end. And I think that's a design ethos that's very rare, I think, actually, in the compliance industry and the risk industry, because risk people don't think like that. It's not necessarily a technology problem, but risk people don't think like that.
I'd just like to say how much I agree with that. I think that the point about solving the actual problem, it's so fundamental, and it's so much part of. But one of the things that holds back a lot of innovation is people being unsure as to how to apply rules and constraints based around a completely different way of doing things to a world, because they don't take the approach that you've just talked about, which is to look at the actual reason for the law or the compliance requirement. And so I think that's a really important point.
John, you got anything to add to that? I've got another question for you.
I began the journey on the discussion, so I don't know if you want to circle back to me on it or not, but I resonate with all of this, especially this tick box thing. And perhaps I sparked that with the comment about giving our clients the ability to do those box checks. But not that it would diminish the efficacy or the reliability or the concern we all have, but making sure that it's done right and that it's a value to the end user and to the customer. So, yeah.
I'll come back to an observation on what you were saying about Lloyds there. think it's a bit like, it reminds me of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy scenario. I don't know if anyone remembers that, where they decide to get rid of the third of the population that isn't very useful because they don't think they need them, and then they suddenly realise that actually they were very important. Strangely, the same bank, this was many years ago, in the fraud context, did an analysis of the fraud systems it was running, and decided that well, they weren't getting any of this type of fraud, so we can switch this one off. And they did, and within about a week, the fraudsters had realised it was gone, and they were deluged with that type of fraud again, and they had to turn it back on, which meant they had to recontract with the people who they thought they could save the money with, which of course became very expensive at that point. So yes, you need to be very careful about making those decisions when you're in risk. John, you offer choices of ID proofing, don't you, within your portfolio? And in the context of age, how do you see that, the connection between ID and age from an orchestration point of view? Where does age fit into what you're doing?
I guess I feel like our customers on this question more and more are, I think they're merging the two ideas together of an age and identity verification. I mean, most of our clients want to make sure that they've got the person on the other end of that not present transaction to actually be that person, in addition to knowing that they're of a certain age. Most of us in this industry have been struggling, all of us have been struggling in this industry for years as to how you verify the thin file. How do you verify the person that doesn't have a driver's license? How do you verify the person that doesn't have something they can assert for their identity? And I think, depending on your region of the world, and this seems to be getting better to me, but there's lots of places where that's still a big challenge. And so in terms of the I think just in terms of the ability for us to manage the methods that we can provide, I think that's from an orchestration point of view, that's a sort of a big value add to our end user customers who are saying, look, I want to be able to verify their age, okay? But frankly, the identity to me is just as valuable or just as important. I know that throughout the conference, there's been a lot of discussion about the adult entertainment industry and online where, anonymity is the key. Like, folks just don't want to be known. I don't want you to know my identity. I just want you to know I'm of a certain age. And I think there is certainly a move afoot to separate out this age and the identity components for the sake of privacy, for the sake of being able to, as you mentioned earlier, this is my data. I want to be able to control my data. I'm not necessarily interested in telling you my eye color and my height. I just want you to know I'm over 18 and take my driver's license. You probably know a lot more than you need to know. And I think that's one of the big things in orchestration for us that we're finding with our new ID Max product, which is designed to leverage reusable identities where we can just say, okay, look, I've got a credential from a third party that's issued this. And if my end user customer is not necessarily concerned about the name and the address and some other information about an onboarded client, these reusables are very valuable because they can then minimize the data that's shared. The individual on the other end of the transaction can assert their identity. But again, it's a choice. And so you've got orchestration brings lots of choices for both parties, right? You've got my data, as you mentioned, it's my right to manage that data, but you've also got the businesses who want to be able to rely on information that they get from a newly onboarded customer, that they are who they say they are, that they're of a certain age, and giving everybody a choice of methods and giving them a choice of an opportunity to take any one of those methods based on their appetite for the risk or their appetite for wanting to make sure that they minimize the amount of data they collect or hold about an individual. See, all these things are benefits of orchestration that I think get realized as more methods come around. It's a bit like future proofing. Yeah, you say as new things evolve and things become more intelligent for us to use, where I can minimize that data and keep the privacy and be assured of an age and all of that. I think that's one of those big benefits you get. And again, just to go back, I mentioned earlier, I take the longest way possible to answer a question, but I think age and identity are, I think, coming together in a way for my customers anyway, most of them, who want to say, I don't want to just know that there's an age out there that someone's asserted to me. I'd like to know that they are who they say they are, and I want to associate a carbon person with the information that I'm collecting.
So picking up, there's a number of recurring themes coming out of here. You talk about choice several times there. We talked about privacy, then connected into that as well. Is there a commercial angle around the orchestration as well? I think you touched on it earlier on in some of the, part of that choice is a commercial choice, but there's also, I think you talked about cost effectiveness as well, Chris. Is that so? Explore a little bit more about the commercial value an OSP can provide.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the commercial value an OSP can provide, or the commercial value any of us in this whole kind of tech ecosystem can provide, is all about ultimately the process or the productivity that you provide to the underlying process. And I think it's quite interesting. I was just listening there, and I thought one of the things that really strikes me about this is that we have a bit of a tendency to try and solve the insolvable problem. So, are you talking about, and that gets in the way of commerciality sometimes, because it is you cannot, by verifying someone's age when they log on to an online porn site, for example, you're not validating who's watching it. You're not validating who's consuming that. It might be a whole bunch of people in a room. You don't know that. Similarly, when somebody buys a bottle of vodka and you verify that they're allowed to buy it, you don't know they're going to drink it. And those are physical world problems that you cannot solve with technology. So don't try. That's the first thing. So the point is to be much more pragmatic, I think, when you're trying to think about this commercially. Be pragmatic about the marginal value adds you can create without trying to solve insolvable problems. So if people are prepared to sell alcohol to somebody in an off license on the basis that they show a driving license or some other proof of age, then you should be able to add value by providing different ways of doing that digitally without people necessarily having to reveal their date of birth, for example. That's a really valid outcome, but you're not going to solve a series of other problems around the consequences of consuming certain things in a country where they're illegal, for example, which are beyond the scope of what you're trying to do. So a bit of pragmatism and just a bit of sensible constraint around the value you're adding to the specific use case. So one of my use cases, for example, around digital signing is we've been doing digital signing for years and years and years for the Isle of Man Ship Registry and various other ship registries around the world, where it's quite simple. By providing a digital version of a document signed by the government, then, in other words, with the that party identified to a sufficient standard, you can save an absolute fortune in sending documents around the world in a huge amount of time. End of story. It's a very simple commercial use case, so you can charge for that on a transactional basis. In other situations, you won't be able to charge on a transactional basis, or it's very hard to justify. And again, I think this is one of the hurdles people face because they've built a lot of expensive tech and they want to know how to monetize it. Sometimes you can't do it at a transactional level. So I would counsel a huge amount of flexibility and willingness to pivot. I think you mentioned pivoting, didn't you? Around how you identify the value and identify what's the best way to achieve your share of it.
Brian,
well, I was just going to say that I think that's perfect, right? The answer that you can only solve so much. The digital identity, age assurance done electronically is not the silver bullet that's going to solve the world's problems. It is just another tool that's going to be used, and like any tool, it can be used for good and it can be used for bad, right? So we have to recognise that it's a double-edged sword, but it's not going to solve the world's problems. Just quickly on the commercial model, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
In our view of the world, which is personal data store centric, the role of the orchestration provider is linking a reliant party, an organisation, to someone's personal data store. Now we have a utopian vision of this, of course, because on the one hand that sounds like a very simple thing to do. The reality is that you're fundamentally rewiring the power relationships in society, right? Which is no mean feat to take on. And the way that you probably can express this, building on the my data, my decision stuff, is the provocative statement is that why does any organization have my data? They only need a key to my data that I authorize them to accept. They didn't. Why does any organization have my customer record? It's not relevant That's down to the old world where we've built up with organizational centric databases. It doesn't need to be like that. That's a design choice that we make, right? So we could choose to rewire the way the internet works and the way data works completely differently. And why does any organization have the data? They don't need it. They only need a key to your data. And the commercial model on that is that you think about the amount of work that has to happen to keep customer records up to date, right? To make sure that privacy policies are maintained. All the compliance expenditure that we talked about earlier on, that would go away if organizations weren't storing your data, but you allowed them access to your own personal data store. There's a commercial model.
Yeah, fantastic, fantastic. We've only got 10 minutes or so left. I'm going to turn to the audience. Is there anyone in the audience got any questions, or online, if there's any there, if you want to send them in? Have we got any online ones already? No, nothing yet. And Steve, sorry, I need to give you the mic. Hang on.
Steve Panifer, Hyperion. First, apologies for being late. I was in another session, so you might have covered this already. But the thing that strikes me about orchestration is, okay, it's providing the service provider with lots of different ways of bringing their customers on board, but that might create complexity for the customer because they come and then there's like a myriad of things that is being presented to them. So how do you get benefits on both sides, I guess? Not only give the service provider everything they need, but also make sure that it works well for the customer.
I've got the mic, so I'll start. But but very quickly, I think it's about providing it. I think the points that have been made about user experience are incredibly important in this, and in the context that we're working in at the moment on the project I described in the Alaman, then it's really about making sure that there is a curated set of services that are accepted. That the user may. The whole thing there is that the user may already have a service that they use and they're comfortable with, a data store, a data wallet, or whatever it happens to be, or and making it easy for them to use what they're already comfortable with and trust in order to access the service of the relying party is the key to that in that context.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think I might come at it from a different point of view in terms of the layer of complexity that gets created. I think it actually is diminishing the layers of complexity for the end user customer, for our customer. Most of our customers would like to be able to leverage multiple methods. They might even like to be able to leverage multiple providers and create journeys based on those. And the complexity grows as they start adding point solutions. Yeah, you had a point, you had a point, you had a point. Now we've got contracts, we've got compliance, we've got all kinds of integrations with APIs and management of those APIs and all the rest. So it seems to me that the orchestrated approach diminishes or reduces the amount of complexity for my end user customer. It almost takes that complexity and puts it on us, on the orchestrator, because the orchestrator is out there making sure that all those boxes, as you put them earlier, all those boxes are checked, yeah? So that the end user customer then can not only just be able to have someone to rely on to source the method or the service, and then to manage that service, and then even better to standardize it like we do. So like when you come to us and you decide you want to integrate, you get a very low-code integration, and then you get a no-code orchestration, because you're going to log in and just drag and drop and make your orchestration happen in terms of your your business flow and your rules and all of that. And with us now, it's all your screens as well. But you're taking away that layer of complexity of managing all the contracts, all the compliance, and all those other components that would necessarily be yours to manage if you took a bunch of point solutions and tried to marry them up to get the best result. So, yeah.
Thank you. Jutta Kroll from the German Digital Opportunities Foundation. I'd like to refer to you, John, what you said about identity verification and age assurance and the linkage between both. And we Germans are very sensitive with our privacy, and the German government has decided to keep anonymity first for all the users. So it shall be guaranteed that all users can use all digital services in an anonymous way. And how would you deal with that situation, especially that Germany is not an island, so we shouldn't have a separate solution for Germany, but still we have that situation that we have to prioritize anonymity.
Yeah, and I think the orchestrators play an important role of being sensitive by jurisdiction and by culture and by, any kind of an application where you can apply a method. And if privacy is the biggest concern, well, then perhaps as we future-proof our process, we say, look, I think you should probably use reusables. Let's use the German government-issued digital identity where I can control what I say, okay? And the orchestrator's managing that for you. So today we have 7 digital credential wallet providers that we've integrated to allow our customers that kind of flexibility. So their end user gets an option and says, hey, would you like to use your German ID for this in Germany? Okay, great. Yeah, I don't want Schufa knowing anything about me. I don't want to go to get data about you. I don't want to know anything in Germany about, all I want to know is that, I can rely on a government issued asserted identity. So I think the orchestrator plays a role in making sure that we can accomplish something like you're concerned about. Yeah.
Very interesting. I'm going to declare an interest here. I'm half German, and I've lived in Germany, and oh, there you go. As a good morgen. I think Germany's really interesting in this respect because and again, you'll forgive me here, I hope, but I think Germany has really been in the process of tying itself into some really difficult Gordian knots around this, because actually you're thinking about it. Everything you said relates to how you think the German state should regulate the private sector's access to personal data. I don't think it necessarily relates to how the German state and our states are going to operate in terms of their administrative processes, because they will always require identity for those. And so I think there needs to be, it comes down to pragmatism. I think needs to be a bit more pragmatism about when privacy and anonymity are necessary compliance requirements rather than it being taken as being an absolute before you do anything. By a bit of advice to the German state, I'm sure they're listening.
Well, I probably don't really have much more to add from the previous comments, because in my view of the world on the personal data stores, anonymity is core to the whole thing, right? Because organizations don't store your data. So I know there's been some work done in Flanders, for example, around solid plots, which is a case study that people could actually look up around that. Organizations don't need to have your data. This is a culturally sensitive point, right? Every country is going to be different. And the way obviously compliance works within every country is completely different. I have a view that law, by the way, and compliance and technology is the same thing. They're just structured human knowledge, right? That's organized in a certain way. And to give you an example of that, if you look at a program code, it's not too dissimilar to the way that you do a contract. It's declaring its variables or the clauses at the top with its subclauses and such like. So there are common ways that we go about solving problems, but the way they're implemented is different from country to country, culture to culture. But the principle has to be that the individual's in control.
I just want to make one other little point on this, which is that there's an area here. A lot of this is about, we talk about access and anonymity. Quite often, what we're actually talking about is entitlement. So, for example, my mother is over 65, it won't surprise you to know. She's entitled to free bus travel in Scotland where she lives. It's impossible virtually to disentangle identity from age in the context of that entitlement. And I think that's where the sort of thing. So a much more positive spin on this is to recognize that sometimes entitlement is about the individual and the identity of that individual, where age may be the characteristic that's giving them that entitlement. And they're more than happy for you to know it. And also, in order to manage that entitlement and the cost associated with it, you also need to tie age to identity.
And at that, I think we're going to have to wrap up, that's a brilliant closing statement, because you connected age and identity in the last sentence there. Fantastic, well done. And thank you to all of our panelists for your time and insight this morning. It's been absolutely brilliant. I'm sure the audience has really appreciated that. I think a round of applause, please, for the panelists. Thank you. Thank you very much.